made a mistake. And now I'm terrified. If you're new here, I'm Stefanie, a lover of all things stories. Somehow, almost all of the books on my September TBR have supernatural elements. So let me start off by saying that I am in 3 book clubs. So I'll start by giving you the books that I'll be reading for my book clubs, and then I'll let you know a little bit more about the rest of my TBR. So the first book on my book club list is for the book club that I am in with my sister and some in real life friends. And that book is The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. When Mouse's dad asks her to clean out her grandmother's house, she says yes. After all, how bad could it be? Answer, pretty bad. Grandma was a hoarder and her house is stuffed with useless rubbish. That would be horrific enough, but there's more. Mouse stumbles across her step-grandfather's journal, which at first seems to be filled with nonsensical rants, until Mouse encounters some of the terrifying things he described for herself. Alone in the woods with her dog, Mouse finds herself face to face with a series of impossible terrors, because sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real, and they're looking for you. And if she doesn't face them head on, she might not survive to tell the tale. So as I mentioned, this is the book that I'm reading for the book club that I'm in with my sister and Jennifer, who's been in a couple previous videos, and some other in real life friends. This was picked because we're heading into spooky season. So the next few months kind of all ended up being more horror related books. I think we're reading The Twisted Ones for September for our book club in October, and then we're reading Frankenstein in October for our book club in November. So like we're kind of getting like 2 months of like horror spooky vibes. I'm really excited for this book. I really enjoyed The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, as well as What Moves the Dead by them. I think they are very good at writing horror, and honestly, just a good writer in general. I think I have their whole backlist on my TBR for at some point or another, and I think I have on my bookshelf somewhere. I don't think you can see it here, it'd be on the one you can't see, but I have another book that's more in their like dark fantasy vein, which I'm really looking forward to getting into. And then of course, the third reason I'm really excited to be reading this book is the North Carolina setting. I live in North Carolina. This is set in North Carolina. This is set in rural North Carolina, but quite honestly, where I live, you don't have to go far to be in rural North Carolina. I feel like this is maybe more on the west side of the state where there are a bit more mountains and, you know, deep forests, but at the same time, I live in the city that's known as the City of Oaks. So there are trees everywhere, guys. That's one of the most beautiful things about North Carolina. Anyway, I digress. But yes, really excited to be reading another T. Kingfisher. I actually saw when I was on like a sister night, we went up to our local bookstore and my sister bought this book because she's like, oh, I don't have it yet and I need it for book club. And we saw it. And underneath it was posted a notice that I took a picture of that T. Kingfisher and a couple of their authors whose names are escaping me at the moment are going to be at that book club in September. So I'm thinking I might go to that event. The second book that I'm reading for my book clubs is Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. What if you could live life again and again until you got it right? On a cold and snowy night in 1910, Ursula Todd is born to an English banker and his wife. She dies before she can draw her first breath. On that same cold and snowy night, Ursula Todd is born, lets out a lusty wail, and embarks upon a life that will be, to say the least, unusual. For as she grows, she also dies, repeatedly, in a variety of ways, while the young century marches on towards its second cataclysmic world war. Does Ursula's apparently infinite number of lives give her the power to save the world from its inevitable destiny? And if she can, will she? So this is the book that I'm reading with the book club that I'm in with my roommate and some of her friends. I'll be honest, I wasn't super enthused that this was our book choice for this month, but that's mostly just because I spent what felt like all of July reading books about like alternate realities and lives, while this one seems to be more about like reincarnation and almost like a time loop. I don't know that much about it other than that. So far, the people who have read it already have said that it's really good. So I am looking forward to it more now. I just was kind of out of that headspace and ready to move on from that kind of feel of story. But, you know, I'm not going to hold that against it. I will probably also be reading another book with my third book club, but that doesn't tend to be quite as structured as far as when we read things. Currently, we're supposed to be reading The Cemetery of Untold Stories by, I want to say Julia Alvarez, but don't quote me on that. I don't know the author off the top of my head. Yes, we're supposed to be reading The Cemetery of Untold Stories. I have already finished that, so I'm just waiting for the rest of my book club to finish, and then we'll meet and talk about it, and then we'll pick the next book. So I don't know what that third book's gonna be. I'm sorry if you hear yowling. I have my office door shut, and the cat that we are fostering right now is outside yowling, trying to get in. I might let him in, because I'm a sucker. I'm sitting here. You can't sit here. Sorry about your luck, man. If the tripod moves, he's right at the foot of the tripod, so sorry about that. According to my story graph, I can read about 8 books a month now. That is kind of the standard for me. So what am I going to read for the other 6 books this month? I'm glad you asked. In 2022, I started participating in Book Roast's magical readathon set in her world of Aeldea. I created a character. I had a whole costume thing going on for one of my videos, which if you're curious about that, I'll link the video in the description box below. And then when I started to get burned out, I just didn't do the rest of the readathon challenges. So when my TBR game told me to do a readathon for my next read, I decided to, you know, in typical Stefanie fashion, overachieve and catch up on the magical readathon. There are 2 years worth of magical readathons to catch up on that I will be doing, which is kind of funny because I feel like Book Roast just announced the next semester of the challenge for 2024. If you're curious about what the magical readathon is, I'll link the playlist in the description box below as well. It's a lot of fun. And so that's going to be kind of the focus outside of my book club books for the next few months, is catching up on those challenges. Starting where I left off, that would be Lightfall, which is kind of the winter solstice holiday in this world. But it's the Lightfall from 2022. And what we did for that Lightfall event is that we went to Old Favor Pass. So how the challenge works is there's a list of shops that you can go to, and to choose the shop that you go to, you can either choose whatever you want, or if you're like me and like to gamify and randomize your TBR, you can roll a d6 to see what shop that you go to. My first roll was a 2. So I headed over to Shank and Shaw Legitimate Retailer. I think that's the name. Let me double check. Yep. And that shop sells curiosity trinkets and devices. And this roll alone is one of the main reasons why my TBR this month is so scary. And that's because the prompt for that location is horror. Your first thing is to just read a book in that genre, and then there are extra things that you can do at the shop to read other books in that genre, but that also meet that secondary prompt. So for the first book on that, the just straight up horror book, I went with The Whispering Dead by Darcy Coates. She hears them whispering. Homeless, hunted, and desperate to escape a bitter storm, Kira takes refuge in an abandoned groundskeeper's cottage. Her new home is tucked away at the edge of a cemetery, surrounded on all sides by gravestones, some recent, some hundreds of years old, all suffering from neglect. And in the darkness, she can hear the unquiet dead whispering. The cemetery is alive with faint spectral shapes, led by a woman who died before her time. And Kira, the only person who can see her, has become her new target. Determined to help put the ghost to rest, Kira digs into the spirit's past life with the help of unlikely new friends and discovers a history of deception, ill-fated love, and murder. But the past is not as simple as it seems, and Kira's time is running out. Tangled in a dangerous web, she has to find a way to free the spirit, even if it means offering her own life in return. I chose this book because, one, I loved Gallows Hill by Darcy Coates. It's a 5-star read for me, and I actually went and bought a physical copy after reading the ebook. There's also a bit of nostalgia in this choice for me because when I was growing up, one of my best friends lived across the street from a cemetery, so we actually spent a lot of time playing in the cemetery, but it also maybe gave me nightmares when I stayed the night there. Also, I always love when the story has to uncover some secret, so the description of this definitely caught my attention. It's also the first in a series, so I'm curious. I don't think I've ever read like a horror series before that wasn't like an anthology. I'm really excited to see what my first horror series experience is going to be like. So at Old Favor Pass, you don't have to stay at the stores and do the extra prompts, but as I mentioned, I'm an overachiever, so I decided to do the extra prompts. And the second prompt is to adopt a bone cat, which means that I needed to read a horror book with a mostly black cover. And for that, I chose The Girl in the Well by Rin Chupeco. The Ring meets the Exorcist in this haunting story about a boy whose last hope for protection lies with a vengeful ghost. Okiku wants vengeance, and she gets it. Whenever there's a monster hurting a child, the same way she was hurt 300 years ago in Japan, her spirit is there to deliver punishment. But one American boy draws her like no other. The two are pulled into a world of eerie doll rituals and dark Shinto exorcisms that will take them from the American Midwest to the remote valleys and shrines of Aomori, Japan. The boy is not a monster, but something evil writhes beneath his skin, trapped by a series of intricate tattoos. Can Okiku protect him? Or is her presence only bringing more harm? So this will be my second Rin Chupeco book. I initially read the first book in her trilogy, The Bone Witch, which is also called The Bone Witch. And while I didn't love it, I really loved the world building. It felt new and fresh. So I'm excited to read this story by her. I'm also really intrigued by the mix of like American culture and Japanese Shintoism and this idea of creepy dolls, which is one of my personal phobias. I spent too many Christmases in my childhood being in Babes in Toyland as a toy that turns evil. I'm really intrigued by this story. Plus, like, how are you not intrigued by a horror story that sounds like it would be an incredible anime? Like, I would watch the heck out of this as an anime. Or at least I think so. I haven't read it yet, so I don't know for sure. The last special task I could do at Shank and Shawl was to buy a robe of deception, which meant in this case to read a short story that was a horror story. I am not normally a short story fan, but I do particularly enjoy horror short stories. I think horror is a genre that lends itself really well to short stories. And for that, I chose Through the Woods by E.M. Carroll. Discover a terrifying world in the woods in this collection of 5 hauntingly beautiful graphic stories that includes the online webcomic sensation His Face All Red in print for the first time. Journey through the woods in this sinister, compelling, spooky collection that features 4 brand new stories and 1 phenomenally popular tale in print for the first time. These are fairy tales gone seriously wrong, where you can travel to our neighbor's house, though coming back might be a problem, or find yourself a young bride in a house that holds a terrible secret in A Lady's Hands Are Cold. You might try to figure out what is haunting my friend Jana, or discover that your brother's fiancé may not be what she seems in The Nesting Place. And of course, you must revisit the horror of His Face All Red. So once again, this is a recommendation from Once Upon a Bookish Steph, whose channel I'll link below if you're curious. I have been wanting to get back into graphic novels. I have been reading My Happy Marriage, which is just cute, light, fluffy marriage of convenience. Or I guess it's technically an arranged marriage, not a marriage of convenience. Anyway, but Steph really recommended this in one of her last wrap-up videos, So I decided to give it a shot. And I have to say, the descriptions for all 4 stories sound really intriguing to me. So I'll probably overachieve some more and read all 4 of them. All right, so after finishing up at this location, I rolled again and I got a 5, which led me to Occult Premonitions, a fortune teller and fortune tools shop. The genre at this location was to choose a science fiction. So I chose Neon Ghosts by Daniel Green. What would you do to keep your dreams ad-free? Bruised, stoned, and still adjusting to her latest wear implants, apprentice enforcer Taya Mint plunges into the darkest depths of Megastructure 703, challenging everything she thought she knew about life within the walls she has never stepped beyond. With only one assignment left to earn her full license, Taya finally stands a chance to rebuild a life wounded by grief, but soon she discovers the kidnapping she's investigating is just a piece of the puzzle, one that leads to grisly death and the greedy heart of power within the structure. When evidence points to a supernatural threat as the culprit, Taya finds herself needing to rely on cold-blooded allies just to survive the hell that is 703. In order to save an innocent life in a world polluted by zealots, Taya will have to learn just how much it costs to face the monsters that occupy humanity's artificial Eden. So if you follow BookTube at all, you probably know who Daniel Green is. He's one of, I would say, the most popular booktubers on this platform. And we all know that he's the go-to channel to talk about epic fantasy. But when he announced his Kickstarter for Neon Ghosts, I decided to back the paperback version because I thought it was really beautiful and, you know, I like to support my fellow creators. But like, look at this artwork. It's so pretty. Cyberpunk isn't usually my thing, as evidenced by the fact that this is actually the only sci-fi on my shelf. Not that I don't like sci-fi, it's just not something that I tend to naturally gravitate towards in the bookstore. I tend to gravitate towards fantasy or romance, but I have been reading a lot more science fiction lately, so I am actually pretty excited to get into this. Let me tell you though, it's a chunky book. I mean, it's just under 500 pages. That's long for a sci-fi, I feel. For one of the extra activities at this location, I could get a divination reading, which means that I should read a speculative science fiction. So I chose The Ministry of Time by Callie-Ann Bradley. I think I'm saying that first name correctly, but, you know, somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. In the near future, a civil servant is offered the salary of her dreams to work on a top secret project. A recently established government ministry is gathering expats from across history to establish whether time travel is feasible for the human body, but also for the fabric of space-time. She is tasked with working as a bridge, living with, assisting, and monitoring the expat known as 1847, or Commander Graham Gore. As far as history is concerned, Commander Gore died on Sir John Franklin's doomed 1845 expedition to the Arctic, so he's a little disoriented to be living with an unmarried woman who regularly shows her calves, surrounded by outlandish concepts such as washing machines, Spotify, and the collapse of the British Empire. But with an appetite for discovery, a 7-day cigarette habit, and the support of a charming and chaotic cast of fellow expats, he soon adjusts. Over the next year, what begins as an excruciatingly uncomfortable housemate dynamic evolves into something much deeper. By the time the true shape of the ministry's project comes to light, the bridge has fallen haphazardly, fervently in love, with consequences she could never have imagined. Forced to confront the choices that brought them together, the bridge must finally reckon with whether what she does next can change the future. So I first heard about this book on the, Ask a Book Collector podcast on Spotify. I mean, I'm sure the podcast is probably on other platforms, but I listen to it on Spotify. And I remember really enjoying the discussion that the author and the host were having and being like, oh, well, that's intriguing. And I think I even added this to my TBR after listening to that podcast. And then it popped up as an option for my book of the month. So I was like, oh, I know this book, and immediately hopped on it. Had to wait a little extra because I guess book of the month initially sold out and had to like print more of this book in particular. So in that way, you could kind of say that this book seemed like I was fated to read it because everything just kind of fell in place between hearing about it on the podcast, having it come up as my book of the month, and then having this prompt as part of my readathon TBR. The last activity that I decided I would definitely be doing for my September TBR is to buy a star map, which means that I needed to read a science fiction book with stars on the cover. So I chose Foe by Ian Reid. We don't get visitors. Not out here. We never have. Junior and Hen are a quiet married couple. They live a comfortable, solitary life on their farm far from the city lights. But in close quarters with each other, one day, a stranger from the city arrives with surprising news. Junior has been randomly selected to travel far away from the farm. Very far away. The most unusual part? Arrangements have already been made so that when he leaves, Hen won't have a chance to miss him at all, because she won't be left alone. Not even for a moment. Hen will have company. Familiar company. So this was another book recommended by Steph. No, I'm not obsessed. I just happen to really be intrigued by some of her recommendations lately. I thought that this had a really intriguing premise. I'm wondering if it's like a clone or an AI or something along those lines that maybe looks like the husband. We'll see. I'm curious. I'm intrigued. I've heard good things. And then the other reason I decided to read it is because it was the first sci-fi that showed up on my TBR that had stars on the cover. So based on all the horror books and supernatural elements in these books that I'm going to be reading over the next month, I have a feeling that I maybe won't be sleeping much. So these are the 8 books that I plan on reading in September, not including the book from that one book club that I mentioned. But I will say, please tell me I don't have to do this alone. Do you plan on reading anything with me? Please, maybe? If not, just leave me a ghost emoji and go watch my book versus adaptation for The Black Phone by Joe Hill. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.